Hurricane Beryl, a Category 2 storm, slammed into the Texas coast in late July. Many people thought it was over. They were wrong. The storm surge and winds subsided, but a new danger emerged, a deadly heat wave. Beryl had crippled the power grid. Millions sweltered in the dark. Temperatures soared. The combination was deadly. Beryl's path was unusual. It veered off course, catching many by surprise. The storm's impact on the power grid was catastrophic. Power lines snapped, transformers exploded. Neighborhoods were plunged into darkness. Relief workers struggled to reach those in need. The heat was relentless. It baked the pavement. It turned homes into ovens. The elderly, the very young, and those with pre-existing conditions were most vulnerable. Hospitals overflowed with heatstroke victims. The death toll began to climb. The aftermath of Beryl was a stark reminder. The danger doesn't always end when the storm passes. Sometimes the aftermath is even worse. As days turned into nights, the heat intensified. The lack of air conditioning made the situation unbearable. Fans were useless without electricity. People sought refuge in their cars, running the engine for brief bursts of cool air. The elderly, often living alone, were hit hardest. Many were unable to leave their homes. Some had medical equipment that relied on electricity. Without power, their lives were at risk. The heat wave was a silent killer. It crept up slowly, dehydrating and disorienting its victims. Heat exhaustion turned into heat stroke. Without immediate medical attention, it could be fatal. The situation was dire. The city's infrastructure was overwhelmed. Emergency services were stretched thin. People were left to fend for themselves. Janet Jarrett, 82, lived alone in a small apartment. She was a pillar of her community, known for her kindness and her apple pie. When the power went out, her neighbors checked on her. She assured them she was fine. Days later, Janet was found unconscious in her apartment. The heat had become unbearable. Her small fan lay silent on the floor. She was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Janet became another tragic statistic, a victim of the silent killer. Janet's death shook the community. It put a human face on the tragedy. It raised questions about preparedness, about responsibility, about the value of life itself. Section 4. The rising count heatwave casualties and accountability. As the power slowly returned, the true toll of the heatwave became clear. Hundreds died from heat-related illnesses. Hospitals reported record numbers of heatstroke cases. The elderly and those with pre-existing conditions were disproportionately affected. Questions of accountability arose. Why was the power grid so vulnerable? Why did it take so long to restore power? Were there adequate warnings about the dangers of the heatwave? Fingers were pointed at the electric company. Accusations of negligence and mismanagement surfaced. Lawsuits were filed. The company promised a full investigation. But for the families of those who died, the damage was done. Section 5, Powerless. The electric company under fire. The electric company, facing mounting pressure, defended its response. They claimed the storm was unprecedented. They said they were working around the clock to restore power. But their words rang hollow to many. Critics pointed to years of underinvestment in the power grid. They argued that the company had prioritized profits over safety. They demanded accountability and change. The heatwave exposed the fragility of the power grid. It also exposed the human cost of infrastructure failure. The tragedy sparked a debate about corporate responsibility, government regulation, and the need for a more resilient infrastructure. Section 6. Picking up the pieces. Lessons in resilience. In the aftermath of Beryl, communities rallied together. Neighbours helped neighbours. Churches and community centres became shelters. Volunteers distributed water and ice. The tragedy taught valuable lessons about preparedness, the importance of having a plan for extreme heat events, the need to check on elderly neighbours, the value of community support. The scars of Beryl run deep. The memory of those lost serves as a reminder. We must be better prepared. We must invest in a more resilient infrastructure. We must value human life above all else.